Question is the amendment be agreed to, and I call the member for Moreton.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Amendment Cost Recovery Bill. I have a few things to touch on in this speech, but in terms of convincing people in my electorate about some of the challenges facing us in terms of the environment, I think I should just send out the member for Lyons speech, because that will be a vote winner for me, well and truly. So I thank him for his let's call it a contribution, and I thank the current member for Lyons for his contribution. I also wanted to refer to the member for Port Adelaide's amendments to the legislation, and I will refer to them in details, suggesting that all the words after that be omitted and substituting the following words: that the House notes the government's poor environmental record, as demonstrated by the member for Lyons' speech, the importance of protecting Australia's rich and diverse environment, the need to fully examine the range of changes proposed to the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, or the EPBC Act, since September 2013, and the lack of assurance from the government about the future management and protection of our natural environment. Because the EPBC Act enables the Australian government to join with the states and territories in providing a truly national scheme of environment and heritage protection and biodiversity conservation. So it's interesting to see it through the prism of a little bit of history, I guess, and that's to note how did we come to this stage where the Commonwealth Parliament is talking about the environment. And we can actually go back to Chifley and Menzies and that great surge of migration after World War II, the 7 million Australians that came here, because the Commonwealth Government was so involved with that, and getting the sort of town and country planning out there. They actually said to the local government areas, you need to have a little bit of consistency. We just can't let it be all higgledy-piggledy, or the 700 local governments and the states and territories. We need to have a bit of consistency. So that's where it started. Then you obviously move up to the 70s and Gough Whitlam's changes, where we brought in the Environment Act, and that sort of, I guess, since the 1970s, there's been that cooperative federalism where the states and the Commonwealth have worked together, basically reasonably harmoniously. I'm sorry the member for Lyons isn't here. I mean, we did have to send an F-111 down to Tasmania to sort out a few things, but mostly we have worked things out cooperatively as a federation should. Sadly, things have changed. That great piece of legislation, the EPBC Act, a John Howard piece of legislation, which has served Australia well, done so much in terms of making sure that we protect the environment and protect endangered species, is now being trashed. In fact, for the first time, there is no intergovernmental, the first time in 40 years, there is no intergovernmental forum that's dealing with the environment and water. For the first time in 40 years. A very retrograde step, and I'm sure all current and former and shadow environment ministers would agree that that's a crazy thing to do. Now no Standing Committee on Environment and Water exists at the moment. And we've got this sort of linguistic artifice, I guess, where we're saying, oh no, it's all about state sovereignty. It's all about states making decisions about in the nation's interests. This is a trashing of the historical development in Australia in terms of caring for the environment. So we've got an Environment Minister missing in action, definitely, who basically should take a pay cut because he's abrogating his responsibilities as an Environment Minister, not just to the dodgy White Shoe Brigade down in George Street in Brisbane, also he's out, subcontracting his responsibilities to the local governments of Australia. And how can porpoise spit type people make decisions that are in the nation's interest? Local governments make decisions that are in the local government's interest. That's what they do. States make decisions based in the interests of their states. That's what they do. And they make economic considerations and electoral decisions, all sorts of decisions, even decisions based on the donations given to their political party, as has been suggested by ICAC down in New South Wales. How can an Environment Minister in this parliament stand up and look the Australian people in the eye and say that these local governments and these state governments will make the best decisions for the future of our species, our endangered species and our environment, when we have already seen. And I'll just take you through a couple of the examples. After Campbell Newman was elected Premier, the very next day, on the Sunday, the Deputy Premier, who had not even been sworn in, came out and said we should make the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park smaller. That was the day after the election. That's the sort of government we've got down in Queensland. Now, Campbell Newman, he might have great environmental credentials because his dad was instrumental in the Fraser government in terms of making Fraser Island, the Fraser Island Marine Park National Park a reality. But Campbell Newman and the people that he has surrounded himself with will always make decisions that are based on the best interests of Queensland, whatever they see them to be. A national government, a government that believes in doing the right thing for Australia, will always have that broader view. Now, I say this on a day when the State of Origin match will occur. I proudly wear a maroon tie. I am a Queenslander, proudly, but my heart is a green and gold heart. I believe in that I'm an Australian first. Games of football are important, but the national interest is so much greater than the considerations of states, so much greater than the considerations of some of those local governments. So for 40 years, the Australian government has been the leader on environmental protection. Now we're taking retrograde steps. John Howard would be ashamed of this government and what they're doing in terms of not this particular piece of legislation. The cost recovery is something that we do agree with, we do support, we do agree with that side of it, but there are other aspects of it that are problematic. For a start, massaging it to say that it's going to be part of a one-stop shop is a furphy. We know you're creating 8 stops. 8 states and territories are now going to have input into this process. So this one-stop shop, just because something rhymes doesn't mean it's noble and good. In this case, it's going to be undermining the Commonwealth, and it's going to be undermining the plants and the flora and fauna of the future that are going to be endangered. We heard you read back the speech from the member for Canning and the member for Lyons, and you'll see they do not care about the nation's interests. They do not care. That will be the reality. And you will see that the accreditation of state and territory laws, many of them that will not meet the requirements that the EPBC requires of them, will mean that there'll actually be greater costs, there'll be greater uncertainty, and there'll be legal liability. Great work for lawyers, but not so great for the plants and animals of Australia that are at risk. And also, it will be a breach of our international obligations. You can see that. They come in here saying they're going to reduce regulatory burden, but this policy does the complete opposite. It's going to increase regulatory obligations for business and increase the risks associated with major projects. And let's have a look at what these state and territory governments who do assess development proposal. The reality is, and I can only speak for Queensland, but they've been gutted. All the talent has either been sacked or gone. That's the reality. The people that we're now asking to do extra work, to make extra decisions and make extra assessments that are in the nation's interests, all the good people are gone, or going. And in an atmosphere where we've got an environment minister that doesn't value what they do, a Commonwealth minister that doesn't value what they do, they won't be able to do their job properly. The Australian public, we have seen for the last 40 years, or maybe 50 years, if we go back to the green bans, the Australian people do care about the environment. However, their trust in governments, be it Labor or Liberals, is plummeting. That's the reality. Labor or Liberal governments, we have seen that they make short-term decisions based on the electoral cycle, whereas the environment is forever. We need to do things that are in the best interests of this nation. You know, crazy things like putting a price on carbon for a start would be, but that's a piece of legislation for another day. This current proposal basically will give too much power back to the states and territories, and it's a furphy to suggest that, as the member for Canning did, that there is this red tape is going to be a great cost on business. We're talking, when you look at billion-dollar projects, the environmental investigations are minimal. Now, the mining industry in particular has a great record when it comes to rejuvenating mine sites. I do know that. Modern mining. But let's have a look at what's going to happen. If you've got local governments making decisions about whether water resources will be that trigger with CSG, if you've got local governments making decisions about nuclear actions, including uranium mines, which is a possibility, the Townsville Shire Council making a decision about whether or not a uranium mine should go ahead, or a local government making decisions about World Heritage in an area, or whether there are federally listed species and ecological communities, that will be an absolute environmental disaster. Very short-sighted, a myopic view from this minister that's subcontracting out his responsibilities to the dodgiest people in the business, those that aren't able to make those national considerations. So the cost recovery elements of this legislation I have no problem with at all. But this one-stop shop policy that is the platform they've come into this parliament on is to be opposed at all on every occasion. We need to have legislation that is effective in protecting our most threatened wildlife and places. We've got environmental vandals like the member for Lyons coming in saying that he knows better. He knows better about environmental areas because he drove past a couple of trees once. I have a bit more faith in our scientists. I know that the Prime Minister says today in question time that shaving $100 million off the scientific budgets is nothing to worry about. It's only, I think he said it was small fry or something like that, whereas I actually have a lot more faith in our scientists and what they can deliver, especially for the future. Because I'm one of those people who believes in making national decisions for the future of Australia, not just something based on the short-term electoral cycle. This government, more than any other government in Australia, not these 700 local governments or the 8 states and territories that make decisions based on their interests, this government, this chamber, needs to make decisions that are for the best, in the best interests of this nation. And saying that there's too much red tape when it comes to mining projects and the like, or development projects, is very short-term indeed. This legislation, as I said before us, the cost recovery elements of this are not something that we have a problem with. But let's go back to that proud history that we have as an Australian government. Labor and Liberal, I need to stress that. Labor and Liberal, from Whitlam to Fraser to Hawke to Keating to Howard and Rudd and Gillard. We have all done things that have been in the best interests of this nation. I note the member for Wentworth was one of the environment ministers that actually made a declaration of a marine park that was able to be preserved for the future. Sure, he voted against it last year when it came up in Parliament, but nevertheless, when it came to be disallowed by one of the motions, the member for Wentworth did vote against it. But when he was minister, he was able to declare that part of the world for the future of Australia and the globe. So we do need to do what we can to protect our environment. We were the first in the world to introduce environmental impact assessments in the 1970s. That's the proud tradition we have. Many of these initiatives came out of Sydney and the green bands and people caring about their environment and that urban renewal, things that we have learnt so much from. So, as a Commonwealth government, we need to be doing what we can to protect our endangered species. We need to be doing what we can to protect the environment and make sure that we have sufficient biodiversity. Who knows what will be found in those forests that the member for Lyons was so quick to send the bulldozer through. Hey, maybe we might even find a cure for cancer. I know it's been claimed by every man and his dog in this parliament recently. The reality is that who knows what's found in those environmental areas. So the Australian government, both sides, Labor and Liberal, has a proud record when it comes to protecting the environment. Some of the aspects of this legislation before us are adequate, but the government, the Abbott government, needs to have a look at the poor environmental record it has started with and look at its children and say we can do better. We need to protect our rich and diverse environment, particularly as we are the driest continent in the world, with some species that are found in no other countries. More work needs to be done by this government, and I would give it a D for failing.
I thank the member